This is the Christian Circle podcast, and you're listening to Pamela Fernandez, where we have conversations about Christian living. Here's the show. So, hello, welcome to a new episode of the Christian Circle podcast. This is our new podcast episode for the year 2021. And so I want to wish everybody Happy New Year. We have a new guest who's actually going to talk about Saint Elizabeth Ann Seton. Now, this is a saint who many people consider the Saint of New Beginnings. And because 2021 is looking to be a year where we hope to start many new things and shed away the old from everything that happened in 2020, we hope that Saint Elizabeth Ann Seton will be kind of like a beacon of hope for all the people listening. So we have Miss Catherine O'Donnell, who actually wrote a book about Saint Elizabeth Ann Seton's life. And Catherine, tell us a little bit about yourself and your ministry.
I'm a historian and I'm a professor at Arizona State University. So my scholarly life occurs through research and teaching. But as I worked on the book about Elizabeth Seton, or Mother Seton, as her followers call her, I had the great privilege of working with sisters and daughters of charity who have spent their lives kind of enacting the ministry of Elizabeth Seton.
So for those who don't know, and I myself was relatively new to Mother Seton and her work. So for those who don't know who she is, tell us a little bit about Saint Seton.
I would love to. She is an American. She was born in Manhattan right before the American Revolution. And she had a difficult childhood. Her mother died during the war. Her father was actually a physician in the British Army. And after the war, her father was kind of having to regain his position in society because he was on the wrong side. And she had a young stepmother who had trouble nurturing her, really. So she grew up kind of feeling a little bit out of place in her own home with her father and her stepmother. But she married quite young, 19, and she bore 5 children. And all this time, I should say, she was not a Catholic. She was a Protestant and not particularly church-going. And then as her husband's health failed and his business failed, they lost all of their money and much of their social standing. She turned more to Christianity for support. And then, to kind of make a long and complicated and dramatic story short, she and her husband and their daughter ended up going to Italy in this really desperate effort to save his life and his business. He died very soon after. She was introduced to Catholicism and decided to convert to that religion then. And then the rest of her life, where she founded the Sisters of Charity, which was a benevolent organization, and she became a spiritual leader, all of that flowed out of that really unexpected decision that she made in her 20s to convert to Catholicism.
And from what I've read, I would consider her life very difficult in the sense that she loses her mother at a young age, at 3. She loses her husband. She loses 2 daughters. Her stepmother kind of abandons her. And then, all these upheavals. So what are the difficulties? I mean, how difficult was this? In her writing, she must have mentioned how difficult her life was.
Yeah, that's such an important question. And she wrote throughout her life, so I was able to read through it, just a huge number of letters and journals and so forth. So she feels all of these losses acutely. And she also loses young sisters-in-law that she was very close to. Her particular kind of Christianity alienated her family for a while. And she suffers so much from it that she actually tries to will herself to love people less, or at least to kind of love people within reason, just because she can't bear the thought of more loss. And she also knows financial hardship. She had been quite well placed, and then her husband goes bankrupt. when she started the community, they moved into a house that was unfinished, and literally there's snow sifting in through the eaves, so she knows physical hardship as well. And what's so kind of interesting to me and moving to me is that she doesn't let those losses harden her. She doesn't give in to her desire to feel less. Her own sense of what it is to struggle and to feel alone, and even to struggle in her prayer life, which she does, all of that makes her more compassionate toward other people. It makes her gentler. And so she makes those sufferings and trials really a part of her charismatic Christianity that she has to offer.
Okay. And so with even with all these difficulties, like she's she's moving from one home to another when like starting when her father marries again, when her father moves to England, then when she gets married and they have to move from one house, take in all her husband's siblings, they move to Italy, she comes back to New York, then she goes to another state altogether to start her ministry. Did she ever mention in her writings what gave her the strength to endure all this and start all over again and again and again?
Early in her life, she tried detachment. She tried thinking, well, suffering doesn't matter, so I almost might as well be unhappy as happy. I'll just live through it. From her 20s and certainly through to the end of her life, it was her Christian faith that gave her strength. So on the one hand, a sense that this world is not my home, that her true welcome would lie in the afterlife, and also the sense that there must be some purpose to what she was living through. And it was never I'm sure it's actually good that these terrible things are happening, right? It was never something sort of simple like that, but it was, I can't see the fullness of what is going on here, and whatever the sufferings are, I will do my best to be virtuous and pious and to lead others toward God as well. So, but she's also clear in some of her private writings that she really did struggle, and even struggled with feeling that she could be Mother Seton. So she knew that others were turning to her, and it's really quite striking to see that in her letters. She'll be feeling very uncertain, but then when you read what other people are seeing in her, they see this serene, confident figure. But she was quite direct, that she almost felt like she was play acting sometimes, that she really wasn't the person that other people thought she was. She wasn't that strong. But in order to keep the community going, in order to fulfill what she understood to be her duty, she enacted that role until she felt that she truly inhabited it more, which she did by the last, say, 5 or 6 years of her life. It was remarkable. And the last thing I'll say, I know I'm rambling a bit, I kept having to remind myself when I was writing this that, oh my goodness, she's 25 now, or oh my goodness, she's still only 31 or 32, because so much would have happened to her. She would have so many responsibilities, and I would just think of her as a sort of middle-aged matron, and she would still be a very young woman.
So who was she actually writing to?
So she had correspondence throughout her life. She had a very close friend, Julia Scott, and Julia was interesting because Julia was not particularly interested in Elizabeth's Christian faith, and she was not deferential at all to Elizabeth Seton, even as Seton became more known. But she loved Elizabeth, and she brought out the humor in her, and Elizabeth Seton would confide in Julia some of the doubts or frustrations that she wouldn't confide in other people, because Julia was this lifelong woman friend that she had, and she didn't have any sort of performance to keep up with Julia. But she also corresponded with her children. She corresponded with other members of the Sisters of Charity, which she founded as they started missions in Philadelphia and in New York. And she had long correspondences with clergymen too, with ministers, or as Catholics would call them, priests. And with some of these, she had a real spiritual collaboration. So it wasn't simply the priest directing her and how to behave or how to think at all. It was a real back and forth. And it's evident that the ministers would sometimes turn to her for guidance as well. And sometimes she was just writing to herself. So she kept journals at various points in her life, where she had this interesting habit at one point of writing something that she pretended was a letter, but she never sent it, and it's clear she was never going to send it. So really, it was a diary. So for an historian, she's just a marvel because you can find out so much about her through these writings.
So what strengths do you see, or even weaknesses do you see from Mother Seton's writings in her life?
Yeah, to start with the weaknesses, which might seem sort of arrogant to me, because of course she's been sainted, but everyone has weaknesses. She was prone to sharp judgments, so she was very analytical and a good observer, right? And that's in its way a strength, but it did lead her to be very critical of people, and she struggled with that throughout her life, right? Her desire to make other people better kind of warred with her desire to be a compassionate person. Right at the time of her conversion, too, I find her a little difficult to like, which I struggled with, because you want to like the person you're writing about. But right at the time of her conversion, she really felt that she had found the true answer, and there was kind of one true answer, and she needed to tell other people what the true way to be a Christian was. And it's just a little bit overbearing. And in fact, it was not particularly effective. It alienated her family, and she set it aside pretty quickly. She decided later in her life that she would just live out her Christianity in a way that she hoped would make others want to share it with her, but she would not try to tell people exactly how to believe. So I think she kind of converted that weakness into a strength. And then a great strength is her desire to connect with others and to connect with them as they are. So she did a lot of teaching in her life, both formal teaching of school children and informal spiritual direction. And in every case, she was not just simply delivering a generic lesson. She would think about who the person was, the student or the adult, whether they needed to be criticized, whether they needed confidence, whether, just how she could sort of get inside their mind and heart in a respectful way. And it's just wonderful to watch. And you see it not only in her efforts, but you see it in the way other people wrote about her, and wrote about her even when they were not writing to her, right? So they're not trying to prove anything to her. They're not flattering her. They'll be writing to someone else. I've never known someone who seemed to see me and respond to me as myself in the way that Elizabeth Seton did. And I think that that's just a tremendous strength of hers, and useful now when people live such different lives and they have such different purposes and priorities. To be able to accept who other people are is a gift.
So what else do other people say about Mother Seton? One is her confidence, and two is that she could direct other people, could give them advice, they could turn to her. What other things have people said about Mother Seton?
Yeah, I love to hear how other people think about her. So she is of particular interest to a couple of groups, and one group is women who just have a lot of things to balance in their lives. Some of them see Seton as a kindred spirit. So Seton was a widow, which made her a single mother, and she was a mother not only to her own 5 children, but she had also had to take on responsibility for the young half-siblings of her late husband, which was another like 5 or 6 children. There were actually 10 of them, but only 5 or 6 of them were of an age where she had to care for them. And she was a career woman in a way. So founding the Sisters of Charity, making that work, she had to balance her responsibilities to her own children and then her responsibilities to her spiritual life and her responsibilities to her working life as Mother Seton. So as people, and it's not just women who juggle a lot of things, but I think something in her experience maybe particularly speaks to women. Another group of people that I have heard speak very movingly about Seton to me are people who have either converted or just simply wanted to enter into a more intense form of Christianity. Because she was not particularly interested in institutional religion when she was younger, and then she was an Episcopalian, and then she was a Catholic. And she tried out different things. She experimented in a way that maybe a more traditional saint might not have, because they might have lived their whole life within one faith world. And she also really struggled. So it's not particularly that she doubted God's existence at any point, but she absolutely felt like her prayer life would be very dry, or she was not behaving or feeling in the ways that she wanted to. And people find that really reassuring, that here's a saint, here's somebody who's certified as a kind of spiritual virtuoso. And this person became exasperated with their prayer. This person doubted how to be a good Christian, and this person struggled over what to believe and whether to share it and under what terms to share it. So that also is something in her that speaks to the experience of, I think, of a lot of modern people.
Since she's been through grief, and I know a lot of people at this time are grieving for, through this pandemic. What does she have to say about grief, since I think she lost 2 daughters as well, and her husband when she was just 29. So what does she say about grief in her writing, if she ever does?
She does. She writes, and one of the clearest bits of her writing is to this friend Julia, whom I mentioned earlier, who lost a daughter in childbirth. And when Elizabeth writes to her, she says, this is going to take a really long time. And you're not going to feel like you can communicate. You're not going to feel like you can come out of it. And that is just to be expected. And just know that I love you, that whatever you need, let people try to give that to you, and don't feel as if you have to explain yourself or you have to work through anything quickly. And she was just always willing, because as you said, she'd had these terrible experiences herself, to just be present and live through people's really desperate unhappiness and grief with them, and to know that that is a season of life. It is as much a part of love as she sees it as happiness. And she also absolutely found and offered a specifically Christian comfort, which is that the earthly relationships are not the only dimension in which love exists. So there is an afterlife, there is the dimension of God's love, which she came increasing to believe we couldn't understand, right? It was not a one-to-one correspondence. But it absolutely offered to her, and she hoped to others, a reassurance that death was not the end. But one of the most kind of beautiful things about her ministry, and certainly when I've been in the presence of people who are influenced by her, is that there aren't simple answers. There's not a time frame. There's not a cheerful, oh, this was for the best. It's just a sort of acceptance of sorrow and a belief that there is a meaning to it, even if we don't understand what that meaning is, and that there will be solace, if not in this dimension, then in another realm.
So Elizabeth died when she was 46, and she was canonized later. What has her legacy been? I mean, now in present day and age, the legacy of Mother Seton.
Yeah. So the kind of organization and the religious community that she founded, the Sisters and Daughters of Charity, ended up founding hundreds of schools and orphanages, some in connection with the French Daughters of Charity, but some on their own. So it had a very practical legacy of helping children and also some adults who are experiencing poverty or homelessness. And there are fewer sisters now because very few people enter Catholic ministry, either as priests or as nuns or sisters now. Many of them are elderly. But the ones that there are, I must say, are still working, are still, for example, helping refugees. And they use the money that was built up over the centuries to finance a range of activities, none of which are exclusively directed toward Catholics. It's become much more sort of generally Christian. I think another part of her legacy is a legacy of compassionate Christianity, and a kind of open-hearted engagement with people of a variety of faith traditions and purposes, all of whom want to live with compassion and also want to live within a Christian spirit. So she's an appropriate sort of matriarch for that moment because she was an experimenter and she did believe that people found their own ways toward virtue and even toward faith. And then the other thing that I love about her and that I like people to think about her is that she did change her mind. You know, she did learn new things. She changed her mind about what was correct, about what relationships to have, about how to share her faith. And that's really hard, especially for people who do believe in something very deeply, to change your mind about some of the technicalities of it or what it means to other people is really grueling and challenging. And part of her legacy, I think, is showing a gracious way of doing that.
And it's almost amazing to think that one woman did all of this work by herself, right?
It is, and I mean the women who chose to sort of follow her, right, and become sisters and daughters, they see it as their word would be providential, so that you know, as they see it, there had to be working of the Spirit in order for this to be possible. And it's certainly clear too that she had to develop all of these relationships. So she inspired others, who then inspired others, right? So it's, I mean, each one teach one. I suppose there's nothing particularly insightful in what I'm saying. But the power of the human infrastructure that she created, which is made out of relationships, and relationships that extended not only across huge expanses of space, but also huge expanses of time. You know, we're talking 2 centuries. It's actually the January is the 200th anniversary of her death, is really remarkable. And it is through that fabric that so much was accomplished. Absolutely.
So, since you were writing, and you obviously must have spent a lot of time reading her work and then writing about her, how did she influence you in any way?
Yeah, I don't want to suggest that she influenced me as much as one would hope. But certainly, I mean, I honestly do think about how she would respond in a lot of situations. So my work, I work in a university, and there's sort of a higher purpose to a university, but there's a lot of daily aggravations and frictions, as there is in any workplace. And I will often think, okay, Elizabeth Seton, who you are not, Catherine, but Elizabeth Seton would not have gotten caught up in this particular email battle, right? She would have thought, oh, I have known this person for 5 years, or I hope to know this person for a long time. What is the fullness of relationship that I can have? Is it collapsed into this one bit of frustration? Clearly not. And with my own students too, and I have thought of this a lot, particularly during the pandemic, as people have just been struggling and we've been distanced. I think, well, she would have spent that extra 5 minutes with that student to ask, why have you not turned this essay in? Or, is your Zoom camera off because of a bandwidth issue? Is everything okay? I don't mean to pry, but do you need anything? And I think that before I spent so much time with her letters and journals, I would have thought, well, the professional thing to do is keep a distance. And it's still important not to be intrusive, but that human connection and just giving someone the opportunity to tell you that yes, they would like to talk to you about something, or yes, they might want to sit and cry for a moment. Or maybe they have something that they're proud of that has absolutely nothing to do with my history class, but they would love to be able to tell another person about it. Giving people the opportunity to share in those ways is purely something that I gained from this research, and I'm extremely grateful for it because it has really enriched my life. It's made me live in a richer world of relationships than I would have otherwise.
Okay. So thank you so much, Catherine, for talking to us about Mother Seton. And I would encourage everybody who wants to know about this saint to get a copy of the book that Catherine has written. It's called Elizabeth Seton, The American Saint by Catherine O'Donnell. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely.
Can people find you anywhere online?
I'm always delighted to hear from people, and I can be reached at my email, which is through Arizona State University, and it's just CODONNELL@asu.edu.
Okay, great. And are you on social media?
Oh yeah, I'm actually, my press made me go on Twitter, so I am on Twitter, although yeah, so that so yes, so it's almost the same. It's C O'Donnell in IN and then AZ. So basically C O'Donnell in Arizona, but C O'Donnell in AZ is my Twitter handle.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Catherine, for spending time with us and talking to us about Mother Seton. And I wish you a very happy new year.
Thank you. You too, Pamela, and your listeners.